Let me present you now the debate and the contenders. The debate is about stress in Romance languages. On team A, we have Francesc Torres-Tamarit, who will talk first. And on team B, we have Nicola Lampitelli, who will talk afterwards. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cloud. Hello, everybody, and thanks for being here with us. Okay, in this presentation, I will briefly walk you through the data on stress in Spanish and Italian verbs. Then I will review two previous accounts of the data, and then I will present my own analysis of them framed within OT. Okay, so the empirical problem we address here is the following. Stress in verbs is sometimes phonologically irregular. From this, several research questions emerge. What is the role of morphosyntactic structure in determining the location of stress in verbs? If stress is morphosyntactically determined, how should this be modeled? By means of morphosyntax prosody interface constraints? And if so, of what type? By means of faithfulness to lexical stress? By means of inflectional paradigm uniformity constraints? And finally, can stress in verbs be accounted for by the same mechanism that assigns stress in non-verbs? In this presentation, we focus on simple finite tenses of regular verbs in Spanish and Italian. We assume the morphological structure in one, root, thin vowel, tense, and agreement. But for the future and the conditional, I further assume an extended stem that includes a future projection different from T, followed by its own theme vowel, as in Torres-Tamarit and Arregui. In our morphological analysis, we also keep allomorphy at a minimum. So as you can see in 2 for the imperfective indicative in Spanish, stress is columnar throughout the entire paradigm of the 3 conjugations because it falls on the same morphological constituent, in this case, the theme vowel marked in boldface. However, stress in the imperfective indicative in Italian falls on the theme vowel, except for first and second plural, in which stress falls on T. Stress is also columnar and falls on the theme vowel throughout the entire paradigm in the imperfective subjunctive in both Spanish and Italian. Okay, the theme vowel is always marked in boldface. The situation is different in the future and the conditional. Although stress is also fixed in these tenses, stress falls on the vowel that follows T, not on the vowel following the root. So the stress vowel is this one here. Okay, and the same happens in Italian, and the same situation is also observed in the conditional for both languages. Okay, so the stress vowel is always the vowel following T. Interestingly, for the perfective past in Spanish, stress falls on the theme vowel, except in the third singular, in orange here, in which stress falls on T, amo. The same happens in Italian, although only for first conjugation verbs. In the other conjugation, stress falls on the theme vowel. Okay, finally, both the present indicative and the present subjunctive in the 2 languages display mobile stress. Stress falls on the root vowel, except in first and second plural in orange, in which stress falls on the theme vowel following the root. And this is also what we observed in Italian, and the same situation is found for the present subjunctive in both languages. Okay, so we start this section by reviewing the analysis of stress in Spanish verbs framed within a distributed morphology by Torres-Tamarit and Arregui, hereafter OA. So for these authors, verbs in Romance receive the syntactic structure in 16a after head-to-head movement of the root to functional heads C commanding the root, V and T. Then at the morphological structure level, between spellout and phonology, a theme position is required by all syntactic functional heads, as in 16b, including T, which is now a complex head. Therefore, verbs have more than one theme vowel, according to these authors. OA's generalization of stress in Spanish verbs is the following. Stress in all finite verbal forms falls on the vowel preceding the T node. To account for this, they propose the stress algorithm in 17, based on the single bracketed metrical grid model developed by Izzardi in 1992. What is most relevant for us are the first three rules in 17, which we exemplify in 18 with first plural imperfective indicative. Okay, so first, according to their stress algorithm, a line 0 mark is assigned for each syllable nucleus. Then a right parenthesis or right foot boundary is inserted to the left of T on line 0 here. And finally, the rightmost mark of each line 0 foot is projected onto line 1. And this is how stress on the thin vowel preceding T is assigned. For the future and the conditional, OA, as I said, propose a more complex structure, including a future head projection different from T that you see here. The difference between the future and the conditional is that T is specified for the feature minus past, and the former is specified for the feature plus past. On top of that, T and ager fuse at the morphological structure level if T is minus past, and this is the reason why only one position is available for vocabulary insertion in these tenses. The example in 20 illustrates how stress is assigned to first singular future. So a right parenthesis is inserted to the left of T, as we showed for the previous tense, and stress therefore falls not on the vowel following the root, but on the vowel following future, okay, because this vowel is before tense ager. Okay, for the perfective past, OA also assumed that T and ager undergo fusion. And as shown in 22a, for second singular perfective past, stress regularly falls on the theme vowel preceding T. Okay, this is the same situation observed for other tenses. However, in the third singular perfective past in 22b, stress falls instead on the vowel expressing both T and ager. And in order to explain this, OA claimed that the vocabulary item expressing the T ager third singular perfective past morpheme is lexically specified to project a line 0 right parenthesis to its right. Therefore, there are two right parentheses at line 0, one before T, as expected, and one on the vowel expressing T ager, each of which project onto line 1. Again, a right parenthesis to the right of the rightmost mark on line 1 is inserted, which explains stress on the second vowel, temió. Okay, in the present, there is also fusion of T and ager, according to these authors, and regular stress before T ager happens in first and second plural present indicative, as in 24a, amamos. However, in order to derive stress on the root vowel in all other forms of the paradigm, like the second singular, amas, a stress deletion rule relativized to apply in present tenses is assumed by Oltermaswet and Arregui, which deletes a grid mark if projected by a word final vowel. So this is a word final vowel and the grid mark disappears. And this is what we see here, in which after assigning a right parenthesis before T ager, the first vowel that projects a grid mark is the vowel on the root. Okay, so to sum up, the stress algorithm in OA makes explicit reference to T, a functional head. Phonology has therefore full access to syntactic structure and is sensitive to functional heads. Exceptionality is accounted for by means of two distinct mechanisms: lexical marking for third singular perfective past, which requires the insertion of a right parenthesis to the right of its projected grid mark, and also a rule of stress deletion that only affects the present tense. We now move on to Dohner 2017. Dohner extends Roca's 2005 analysis of non-verb stress in Spanish to stress in verbs. Dohner argues against OA, who allow the metrical algorithm to have direct access to the complete morphosyntactic structure, which infringes, according to Dohner, strong modularity. Dohner argues instead that the stress domain in both verbs and non-verbs is lexically parametrized to include the entire word or only the stem. Donor argues that different tense morphemes select for different edge settings or stress assigning rules, and that the agreement morpheme is a desinence that can lie outside of the domain of stress assignment. For the present tenses and the perfective past in Spanish, the stress domain corresponds to the entire word, and the RRR edge parameter is at play. And this parameter reads as follows. Insert a right bracket, as you can see in 26a, insert a right bracket to the right of the rightmost element in the word. And as you can see in both examples here, a right bracket to the right of the rightmost grid mark in the word corresponds to a syllabic trochee. And this explains why stress is mobile between the first singular and the first plural present indicative, canto, cantamos, because the entire word is taken into account. The imperfective indicative and subjunctive and the conditional are subject to a different edge parameter, the RRRS from stem edge parameter. Therefore, a right bracket to the right of the rightmost element in the stem, not in the word, is inserted. Aligning a syllabic trochee with the right edge of the stem produces the forms in 27 with stress on the third to last syllable, cantábamos and cantaríamos. So here the domain is the stem, not the word. Okay, the future shows stem final stress, which is derived by a different parameter, the LLRS parameter, which reads as follows. Insert a left bracket to the left of the rightmost element within the stem. Donor assumes, like in Torres-Tamarit, that the stem in the future is an extended stem. And this parameter is responsible for assigning stress to the vowel following the future, as you can see here. Okay, the perfective past shows non-uniform paradigms. And this is attributed to different edge parameters associated with the different entries of the T morpheme in this particular tense, which displays suppletion. Second singular ste, like in 29b, for instance, is marked with the right S edge parameter, and the stem is taken into account. Whereas the empty allomorph, or the elsewhere allomorph in other cells of the paradigm, is marked with a different parameter, the LL right S parameter, and that's why the first singular perfective past has final stress in Spanish, canté. Okay, so Donor's account of stress in Spanish verbs makes use of three different edge parameters, which are selected by different T morphemes. We think that Donor's critique of Torres-Tamarit and Arregui based on modularity is not very well motivated. OA referred to the left of T in their stress algorithm, which is equivalent to referring to the stem. Furthermore, Donor needs different edge parameters, that is, different grammars associated with different tense morphemes, and they're allomorphs in some cases. Okay, so this last section is dedicated to presenting my proposal framed within OT and based on the analysis of Spanish stress for non-verbs by Bakovic, 2016. I will argue that a simple analysis that unifies stress in verbs and non-verbs is possible, and that such an analysis abide by the modular serial interface hypothesis put forward by Bermúdez-Otero, 2012. First, let's take a look at the table in 30. This table illustrates the stress patterns found in Spanish non-verbs and the ranking proposed by Vakovic to account for this data. Regular stress, indicated in green, is stem final and follows from ranking the constraint final stress, relativized to the stem, above non-finality, which prohibits stem and word final stress. If stress is stem final in Spanish, stress is penultimate in words with a terminal element, as in sabana, savannah, okay, with penultimate stress, but final in words without a terminal element, irrespective of whether the word ends in a vowel, as in Panama, or a consonant, as in animal. These are the forms in green. Exceptional stress, in orange, is explained by lexical indexation of the constraint non-finality, okay, ranked above final stress relativized to the stem. When roots are lexically indexed with this constraint, stress is anti-penultimate in words with a terminal element, as in sabana, sheet, or penultimate in consonant final words without a terminal element, as in cannibal. Finally, there is another class of consonant final words exhibiting exceptional stress on the third to last syllable, as in régimen, not accounted for in back of each. In the appendix, I address such a pattern, but I won't talk about it. I won't talk about it for now. Okay, the analysis I want to present abides, as I said, by the indirect reference hypothesis and the modular serial interface model of Bermúdez-Otero. On the one hand, the indirect reference hypothesis states that only alignment constraints can refer to morphosyntactic structure in the input. On the other hand, the modular serial interface hypothesis states that each grammatical module possesses its own representational vocabulary, that computations performed in a grammatical module have no effect upon those carried out by a different module, and that the output of a grammatical module X is displayed at the interface with a grammatical module Y. But more importantly, only a specific subset of the elements present in the output of X is put in correlation with elements in the output, in the input of Y, by means of lexical lookup, realization statements, or mapping rules. Then the computations performed in Y can refer to the correlations between X and Y so established. Okay, in 32, you can see the levels of representation in the modular serial interface framework, I assume. So the output of syntax is the tree in A, which I take from Oltra-Massuet and Darregui. Superscript Roman letters, A, B, C here, link phonological pieces in the phonological input to nodes in the syntactic output without having access to the feature content of syntactic nodes. So I propose that the specific subset of elements present in the output of syntax put in correlation with elements in the input to phonology are only the root node, whose exponent is a morphophonological root, the outermost category-defining functional head, here V, defining the morphophonological stem, and the maximal projection of T, defining the morphophonological word in the phonological input. Then subscript numbers 1, 2, 3 here between the phonological input and the phonological output represent the correspondence relations between underlying and surface phonological segments. In 33, I defined the two relevant constraints in the analysis based on Bakovich 2016. The first constraint is final stress, which assigns one violation mark if the vowel at the right edge of the stem in the input is not in correspondence with the stressed vowel in the output. And the second constraint is non-finality, its mirror image constraint, which assigns one violation if the stressed vowel is in correspondence with the stem final vowel, and two violations if the stressed vowel is in correspondence with the word final vowel. As you can see in 34, for first plural imperfective indicative, amábamos, ranking final stress above non-finality derives stress on the third to last syllable, as in candidate A. Therefore, stress falls on the stem final vowel. Okay, I mark the stem final vowel with this right square bracket here, but that doesn't mean morphosyntactic structure is available in surface forms. It is just for you to locate the stem boundary. And stress in any other vowel fatally violates this constraint. Okay, so this ranking actually explains almost the entirety of verbal forms in Spanish and Italian. Parentheses mark foot boundaries. Okay, and I further assume that stress on the third to last syllable, as in amábamos, follows from a layered foot, but I'm not going to talk about feet structure here, although I assumed this is tangential to the main claim of the talk. Okay, in 35, I repeat the structure assumed for the future and the conditional in Oltra-Massuet and Darregui, and that I assume in my analysis. So here, future had a separate functional category from T, meaning that the stem is extended to include the future morph and a second theme vowel. Okay, stress is final within the extended stem, as in candidate A, amaremos. Stress on the theme vowel following the root, as in candidate B, amaremos, must be ruled out if the stem is defined as the specifier of T agar. Candidate B also violates final stress. Okay, so final stress has to refer to the outermost stem or the specifier of T. Non-final stress within the stem is a lexical property of certain tense morphs. And I assume that exceptional stress in verbs follows from faithfulness to underlying metrical structure, as you can see here in 37. So I claim that one of the allomorphs of the imperfective in Italian, va, and the third singular morph in the perfective past, o, in both Spanish and Italian, are specified with an underlying metrical foot. So as you can see in 38, faithfulness stress prefers candidate A, amo, with final stress, rather than candidate B, amo, with final stress, okay? And this is an example from Italian. So recall that the morph O expresses here both T and ager. It is outside of the stem. In present tenses, stress is mobile in both Spanish and Italian. Stress falls on the thin vowel in first and second plural, but on the root vowel in all other forms. I assume that mobile stress is not exceptional, but obeys the constraint final stress. Mobile stress follows instead from the fact that only the stem of first and second plural forms contain a thin vowel. In all other forms, the stem is equivalent to the root. And I think this is clear when comparing second plural with third plural forms. If third plural had a thin vowel in Italian, the expected forms would be amano, temeno, and partino, instead of attested amano, temono, and partono. And the same for Spanish. We would expect forms like aman, temen, partin, instead of attested aman, temen, and partin. So stress is stem final in both second singular and first plural present indicative, as shown in 40 and 41. The vowel a after the root in second singular forms is a tense morph, and that's why stress falls on the last vowel of the root, whereas it is a stressed thin vowel and therefore part of the stem in first plural. And that's why we derive amas and amamos in the plural. Finally, Italian, unlike Spanish, presents verbs with stress on the penultimate vowel of the root, which in the third plural present indicative cause stress to fall on the fourth to last syllable, indicano or caricano, forms like this. I propose to explain these cases by means of lexical indexation of a constraint non-finality relativized to the root. Candidate C in 42, indicano with regular stress, fatally violates this indexed version of non-finality because stress is root final. This constraint is, however, satisfied by candidate B, indicano, and A, the actual form in indicano. These two candidates violate final stress because stress does not fall on the last vowel of the stem, which in the third plural is equivalent to the root. Therefore, another constraint must be the responsible for discarding candidate B, and I propose that this constraint is non-finality prosodic word prohibiting right alignment of feet, which is dominated in Italian, but is active in this case, an instance of the emergence of the unmarked. In first plural, as shown in 43, for indichiamo, the fact that the stem is not coextensive anymore with the root due to the presence of the thin vowel makes it possible to satisfy final stress without violating non-finality root. Okay, to conclude, I have proposed a simple and unified OT analysis of stress in verbs that follows the undirected reference hypothesis and the modular serial interface model as put forward by Bermúdez-Otero. I claim, following Bakovic, that stress is stem final in both verbs and non-verbs in Spanish and Italian, which includes the root and the thin vowel, and that this is enforced by a syntax prosody alignment constraint. Irregular stress is derived by two different mechanisms in my proposal, underlying metrical structure and lexical indexation, which are also independently motivated in non-verbs. Thank you for your attention, and I give now the floor to Nicola Lampitelli.
Thank you, Shiku. So I wait for you to scroll down.
Is that okay now? You see it?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I will not go into the data again, since Shiku presented it all, and we are basing the two different perspectives on exactly the same data. First of all, I would say that from perspective B that I'm defending here, the imperial problem is that stress patterns displayed by each variety of romance cannot be captured by one generalization valid at a single level of analysis, maybe phonological, morphological, syntactic, or even lexical. So to contribute to the debate, I propose the following questions. Is the distinction in stress assignment made in the lexical entries, the application of rules, constraints, principle, or at the surface level, or do we need to refer to a combination of these? As Chico has just shown, an analysis enforcing both morphology, prosody alignment, and lexical specification looks promising. And as you all know, a long-standing debate in morphophonology revolves around the idea that only procedures exist, or only representations, or a mixture of them. So formal approaches differ procedurally, representationally, or at both levels. From the point of view of perspective B, I'm assuming very broadly, as Shiku did, the existence of syntactic structure that underlie the verb. So there is OA 2005, among others, but also EMBIC and many others. The generalization ONA put forward about the fact that stress fall in all finite verbal forms on the vowel preceding the T node is perhaps it's interesting, but this enforces analyzing future as having a projection distinct from T, for instance. And also, does this predict stress placement in Italian verbs? So this is one question. I will assuming as for the representations, strict CV and direct interface, in which alignment between a morphosyntactic structure and the phonology is represented by CV units. That means templatic positions. The lexical property accentedness can be encoded through the presence of a CV, as for instance, this is made, so the lexically property accentedness is encoded in the representation of the affixes, for instance, by Yeats in another framework, but still the principle is identical. So my second assumption is that a CV unit realizes stress. And I will start with a short introduction of the review of the literature that defends this idea. In CV phonology, there is no hierarchy between the syllabic slots. So how can stress be represented in such a framework? So what people have done is that they analyzed what the stress-related phenomena, such as lengthening, aspiration, reduction, glottalization, and other things. So as for Italian, in the beginning, there was Chierchia that in a metrical analysis proposed that stress adds metrical space. Indeed, it is a well-known fact of Italian that stressed syllables must be heavy. Although there are restrictions, and we'll see a few of them later. Starting from here, this is how Larsen represented the distinction between two tonic vowels. One is lengthened because it appears in an open syllable. The other one is not lengthened because it appears in a closed syllable. Okay, so this depends on the lateral relation between V2 and V1. Which is not crucial for the remaining part of the perspective, just to put the problem down. And the Enguerrard, for instance, in his dissertation from 2016, draws a typology of stress-related lengthening phenomena, saying that the position of CV introduced by stress is binary. Either it precedes or the stress to V, or it follows it. And that the propagation of the auto segment on this CV stress is either concern either the consonants or the vowels. So as for Italian, the facts to retain are the following: stress CV follows the stressed V. only vowel spreads onto the stress CV, and the stress CV entails stress at the surface, but the reverse is not true, as already observed. In stressed closed syllables, there's no lengthening. So there is fatto and not fatto. That is absolutely out. Okay, so now there are a few phenomena that have been analyzed by introducing a CV related with stress, as the glottalization in Danish stud. This is Larsen 1994. And of course, this is the same, representationally is the same as, for instance, proposing a long vowel. There is a typo in the numbering of the representation, so 2A and 2B, I would say. Share 2000 relates the aspiration of plosives in English with the presence of stress and with the presence of an empty CV. In fact, indeed, the aspirated plosives appear either word initially or before stress. And in both cases, an empty CV is responsible for this, as shown in 3. Where the first CV is what has been proposed by Lowenstein 1999 as being lexically present at the beginning of words, and the second CV is the one introduced by stress. So here, the crucial observation is that in CV phonology, there is no mean to distinguish a morphologically conditioned empty CV, the initial site, for instance, from a prosodically conditioned empty CV. Both are identical in the representational level. Engelhardt also analyzes Russian vowel reduction or blocking of vowel reduction in stretched syllables as being underlyingly long, as shown here. In the word garot, the stressed vowel is long, so the two elements cannot be delinked as this happens in the second vowel. Now, interestingly, Faust and Ulfbjörnin in a recent paper developed a grid-based notion proposed initially by in Shanti's dissertation, and integrate this within a strict CV representational system. And this paper is interesting because it introduces some sort of procedural mechanism into the framework. In particular, they argue that metrically significant nuclei project to line 1. So you can see at V1 and V2, the former is metrically significant, although empty. The latter is not metrically significant and empty. So the V1 projects to line 1, and since it projects to line 1, but is it empty, it is incorporated into line 3, and therefore stress falls on that position. So I'm inspired by this work and proposing something related to account for stress in the Romance system. So the main observations that we can do overall are that stress is represented through the effects resulting from its presence versus its absence. There is no formal way to encode prominence except in the model proposed by Faust and Ulfbjörnin. In their paper too, in their models, there is they introduce some procedures into the CVCV framework, and they call it the stress algorithm, and that accounts for Palestinian Arabic stress assignment. And the alignment between the morphosyntactic structure and stress can be enforced by postulating a stress CV, which is sometimes lexically associated with an affix. And this is what I'm gonna show in perspective B. So roots do not bear a fixed accented V slot. I follow standard notation asterisk to mark the stressed V. Roots are projecting items. They project prosodic positions labeled 1, 2, 3 in some cases, and by default stress goes on, in the case of Italian, the second V slot counting from right to left, and stress inserts a CV between position 1 and position 2. As for Spanish, there is no lengthening, but stress goes on exactly the same V slot, the second one, counting from right to left. So Here in 6 and 7, the two verbal templates for both Italian and Spanish respectively, and stress in Italian lengthened vowel, and this is not the case in Spanish. So as for the affixes, I propose the following typology in which there are 3 kinds of affixes. First type is those affixes that are unaccented. So this is what usually is considered to be extrametrical. They're invisible to stress. Then there are unaccented but projecting affixes as the imperfective indicative. So these are affixes that moves the stress, that shifts the stress, as in many cases in Romance, also in the nominal system. And then there are lexically accented affixes that bear a stressed position over a V-slot that overrules the phonologically irregular stress assignment rule, the one that I've just presented. So these are, for instance, the future and the conditional affixes. So here the representation for first singular present indicative, amo and amo, Spanish, Italian and Spanish. Okay, so the suffix is unaccented. And in 10 and 11, please, Chico. Thanks. Okay, here we have a suffix, the third plural present indicative, which is invisible to stress. So it is type 1, and it does not change the labeling of the prosodic, the projected V slots. So 1 and 2 remain unaffected in both cases, and so that's why we have amano and aman instead of amano e aman. So in this case, I follow Shanti's Ulf Björnin 2001, in which only the final V can license the V slot of the stress CV. Okay, so this is a technical detail, and I follow his analysis. So in Italian, some roots instantiate inflected forms in which stress falls on the third vowel from the right, as in carico, I charge. These roots create forms that violate the two V slot window or 3 vowel window, like caricano, they charge instead of caricano. Stressed vowels do not lengthen in either case. These roots are lexically stressed on the V slot labeled 3. So this is the only difference between these roots and the other regularly stressed ones. As for future suffixes are templatic and accented items in both Italian and Spanish. So the prosodic template is overruled. Stress goes where suffix says so. The principle is the rightmost wins. So here, perhaps people will ask questions about, okay, you're introducing constraints. Yes, but they are not violable at all in this case. So are they really constrained? Is it really a constraint, this one? As shown is in Italian, the suffix ro, ero, which I do not analyze internally, is lexically accented on the last V slot. So independently from what happens to the root, stress falls here. Okay, we made a mistake. We thought that we had 45 minutes instead of 40. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to go very fast. 1 minute, I will finish. So the future here is the same, is the first plural. You can go faster, please, Chico. Can you go to 1 second to the diphthongs in Spanish? The following one. One more. Here. Okay. So Spanish is interesting because some verbs possess a diphthong on the root when the root is stressed, like recuerdo, recordamos, or fiero, ceramos. So in this case, it seems that these roots have, instantiates a CV related with stress. So this is the case of first singular present indicative, and in 23 we have the first plural of the same paradigm in which there is no lengthening because the stress falls outside of the root. Another interesting detour is must be made into Catalan, in which there is a vowel reduction. And so in the case of Catalan, what is interesting here is that in the verbal system, as shown by comparison between this form and the following one, the one plural present indicative, the data makes points to the fact that stressed vowels are long, so they are associated with two CVs, whereas short vowels are associated with only one because they are reduced. Okay, so this is exactly the same analysis made by Engar for Russian, but for many others in the framework. So here we have pagem, and in the first example we had pago. Okay, and this systems is consistently instantiated in Catalan. When you add suffixes, there is, like in 26, we were paying, pagavem is the same thing, and in the future we also have this reduction that changes the quality of the vowels, pagerem. So in this case, stress falls on the last vowel because the future suffix is lexically accented. So of course, that slot is obligatorily associated with the star. So stress falls there, independently of what happens on the root. Okay, so just to conclude, a short slide to feed into the debate. So it's not really a conclusion of what I've presented, it's more of a conclusion, a general list of points, some possible things that perhaps people are interested in to debate afterwards. Do representation-based approaches suffice to account for stress patterns in Romance verbs? I'm not convinced the only representation is enough. How do we encode lexical stress into the representations, and how do we compute it procedurally? So this is a huge question. I don't really have an answer. I just propose something. Can predictable stress patterns in turn be derived exclusively in the phonology? And what do these suffixes tell us about cyclicity? Because we didn't talk about cyclicity, but clearly if we assume a syntactic structure underlying these forms, it seems that some suffixes are cyclic, others are not. Okay, so what's going on? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chico and Nicola, for this interesting debate. We have about 20 minutes, right, for questions. We don't have the option to raise the hand, so please, if you can follow the system I explained you at the beginning of this session, you can type your question on the chat, or you can ask for asking a question yourself and unmute yourselves. I think Noam didn't follow the instructions because maybe he was late, but we have at least one question. You can unmute yourself. I cannot do it for you. Noam?
Okay. So I don't have the right to raise my hand.
No, it's just because it's not operative, because if a lot of people does it, it seems it would not be able to manage it. It does this. Okay.
Okay, so just a very quick question. So in Shiku's way of looking at things, there was a constraint that had to be able to pinpoint the root, if I'm not mistaken, right? It said stress the last vowel of the root, right? It wasn't final stress. It was final in the root, right? So the question there is, does that root correspond to any of the stages of derivation? And the second part of the question is, what is the equivalent in Nicola's way of looking at things? Was there an equivalent? Does the account, the second account, need to be able to does it need to distinguish between root and whatever comes after the root, or is it done otherwise?
Yeah, so I think I start right now. Yeah, so I mean, this non-finality constraint relativized to root, it doesn't refer to a stage of the derivation. It just refers to the acategorial root that is given by syntax, okay, which is given exponent, okay, which would be am for amar, right? Or it would be indic for Italian indicano, and the constraint says, okay, the last vowel of this root cannot be stressed in the output. So I do everything in parallel, but it doesn't correspond to a chunk of the syntactic tree because it's just the acategorial root in distributed morphology terms.
Well,
Nicola?
yes. Yes, I think in my perspective, the root contains a lexical or a fixed number of CVs. So the last V slot of that representation can be considered to be the last available position of the root. So but perhaps I didn't understand the question correctly. There was some Russian.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that you needed to, because there's a problem in modularity in Shiku's approach, because he has to recognize a level of the structure that is not one of the two levels that are sent to vocabulary insertion. Whereas I'm not sure that you share the same problem. I'm just asking. Maybe.
Okay.
If not, how do you solve the problem that Shiku solved?
Okay. Yes. The question is that if we consider the last V slot in the root to be lexically associated with the root, and then there is some cyclicity or something that is added afterwards, okay, that is a problem. That's why I said I do not really know how to align the analysis that I proposed in the phonology with morphosyntax.
Okay.
Yeah. Clearly, yes, this is what it has been raised by, I don't know, Jean in many papers about the alignment between affixes and roots in frameworks like distributed morphology. Yes.
Okay, I think we have another question. Ora Matushansky, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, very nice issue and very nice talks. I also have a question about morphosyntactic representations. I think probably mostly to Shiko. The thing is that I was wondering if you distinguish the acategorial root as a separate node in phonology. What happens with verbs that are derived from stems rather than roots, such as something like excommunicate or something like this?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, in cases like excommunicar, nothing would happen, right? So even if those are derived, the stress patterns would remain the same. So excomunico, right? So stress would be on the last vowel of the root, of this derived root, yeah.
But I would guess that these derived roots are not acategorial, or at least I'm not sure about this particular stem, but I'm sure you can find better examples.
Yes, no, you're right. I mean, I said acategorial root, but maybe, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I mean, it could be just any derived. So so categorical roots would also behave as acategorial roots. I would say that. So in excommunico, right? I mean, stress would follow the same pattern. I don't think there are different patterns for those kind of roots compared with roots like amar, like am in amar. Yeah. For instance, nacionalizar, right? To nationalize or things like that. No, it would be nacionalizo, nacionalizamos, right? So you would just take, in fact, in Spanish, only the stem is crucial, right? I only need to refer to roots for Italian, but I don't know whether I'm sure that Italian indicano or caricano, those forms that violate the three-syllable window at the right, you cannot have those forms with derived roots like nacionalizar, right, Nicola?
I was thinking about this. I think so, but the verb that has been mentioned, escomunio in Spanish, in Italian is scomunico. So it's like carico, is an exceptional one.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So then
So
in that case,
they excommunicate will be scomunicano.
Okay.
So perhaps stress is lexically associated with that particular stem in that position. I don't know.
Okay, we have 8 more minutes for questions. Somebody else want to ask something? No? If not, I will ask questions to both of you. What is the exact interpretation of the future unconditional morphs, Chico, for you? Can you explain it again? You can go to the slides if you want.
Yes, well, I mean, for Oltremaeswet and Tarregi, they just assume this future head, which is different from tense. And what they say is that future is, in fact, this future node plus present on T, and the conditional is future plus past on T. And in fact, you can see that in Romance, in subordinate clauses. And you also see it, for instance, in Basque. I think they mention Basque, in which you see the future on the verb, but then for future tense, the auxiliary is in present, and the conditional, you see the future morph on the verb, and in the auxiliary, you see past. So in some, in some languages, you really see that. Yeah, so I mean, there are syntactic, there is a syntactic explanation for that.
Okay.
And diachronically too, because in Latin, it was something like that. And for stress, you see that future and the vowel that follows future really look like a stem, right? Because stress goes not on the vowel following the root, but on the vowel following this bigger chunk, which includes a future node.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add one thing, Claudia? Or there is a no? Perhaps there is a question. Sorry.
No.
There are questions.
No, you
I
can.
think.
You can add. You can add though. Yeah, Gillian has a question. Maybe,
and there is I think somebody else also. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Gillian, you wanna say it by yourself, or I should read it? She says that it's quite semantically respectable to consider future to be different from T. Okay, there needs to be a relation event time, but also a perspective time. So giving it 2 heads also seems plausible. I don't know if you want to add something else, Nicola?
Yes, please, just 1 second. And indeed, I think that phonologically, future seems to add well, I mean, to be what appears from the future suffix to the right in both Spanish and Italian seems to be prosodically minimal words, or I mean something which seems to be prosodically independent from the rest of the stem of the inflected forms. I do not know, because I didn't check phonetically whether studies exist about the fact that long verbs like, I don't know, scomunico in Italian, scomunicheremo, if there is a secondary stress at the beginning, perhaps there is one. So the question is whether we should encode this within a phonological approach. So this is, for me, a question I do not know. There are approaches that account for secondary stress. In CVCV, this is impossible. For primary and secondary stresses are the same thing. So this is the first thing. And the second one about the future to be syntactically different. So I'm not a syntactician, so I'm agnostic. But the question that I'm asking is that if my analysis in morphophonology depends on the analysis I propose in syntax, perhaps it becomes secondary because it is the consequence of what you assume in syntax. So that means that perhaps the analysis should encompass a larger view on what morphophonology and morphosyntax is. So of course, I think these are two different angles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we have another question. Eduardo, maybe? Yes?
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's a very general one. It's actually about the very nature of the debate, the nature of the talk. So, but it's a very general one. I was thinking whether you have any thought about how to decide for constraint-based solution or versus a representation-based solution, also because as there are apparently no constraints on the constraints that you can imagine, and there is also quite a few constraints on the kind of representations that you can think about, especially if you allow for empty things to be there. How can you, do you know how you could eventually decide about one, whether one approach is better than the other? Because if you both, I think they can cover the same empirical domain successfully in the same way. So do you think about, I mean, do you have an idea about which other reasons could be looked at to decide among the two?
Yeah, may I start, Nicola?
Go ahead, yes, but then I will understand.
In this case, I think it is difficult to compare the two perspectives because they rest upon quite different representational and computational assumptions. So for instance, I use more established phonological units like metrical fit, right? And the syntax prosody alignment, OT constraints instead of CV units to represent the skeleton. But I think that for Roman stress, the most crucial aspect that an analysis has to account for is the nature of the syntax phonology interface. And what mechanism is responsible for deriving the metrical and the prosodic structure from the morphosyntactic structure, and how much morphosyntactic structure is available to the phonological component. And my stance on this issue is, I think, quite conservative, in that I assume that the domain for stress assignment is the morphophonological stem, and I therefore claim that the input to the phonology has to put in correlation with phonological exponents, all the syntactic terminals included within the specifier of T, okay? And the same happens for the root, right? In the case of non-finality relativized to the root for Italian in those forms like indicano and caricano. However, I don't refer to things like plus feminine or plus person, right? So in this respect, my question to Nicola would be, what pieces of the morphosyntactic structure trigger the insertion of the CV unit into the phonological representation? And do these units correspond to faces or not? And what mechanisms account for cross-linguistic variation at the interface with respect to this mechanism? I don't know if I answered Eduardo's question, but I think that the crucial thing here is the interface, right?
Okay, Nicola, you wanna
yes,
add something?
very shortly. So I mean I agree with Chico with the first part of the answer, and I would like to add that perhaps another way to do what Eduardo was asking is to test the predictions. Predictions, like in the case of CVCV, clearly the predictions are to be tested concerns what happens segmentally when stress is there. In the case of another, like in the case of Chico's analysis, you have to put into the input the fact that, into the plausible candidates, the fact that the stress lengthened the vowel, for instance, in Italian. So for me, these are the two aspects of the question. First, the interface with the morphosyntax, and the second one is the predictions you can make on the phonological ground or also morphological.
Okay, thank you.